Welcome to the Highland Heights Sunday morning Bible class. We are happy that you are joining us for our conversation. We say it every week. We will say it again. We really wish that we could be in person for our Bible classes and also for our Sunday evening services. Now we're going away from those for just a little while, making sure that we're all safe. But we really do value everyone's safety. And in the meantime, we are still able to open up God's Word and to try to glean from there all of the riches that are contained within. Sadly, though, you have me and Jeremy to talk about it, so we'll do the best that we can. But we are still we're happy to have these conversations, and we're glad that you joined us. If you haven't been with us, we have been going through the Ten Commandments. We spent 1 week just kind of broadly outlining them, and now we're taking one commandment each week. So over the course of 10 weeks, we will get through all 10. And this week we are getting to commandment number 5, to honor our fathers and our mothers. And so as we're beginning, let's go ahead and go to the scripture, Exodus chapter 20. And it's just one verse. Read verse 12. And the one bit of commentary I will give before we begin is, as it says later on, it is the one commandment with the promise. So we'll read the commandment and the promise to follow. So Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay. Jeremy, God is elevating families. He's elevating specifically the leadership of the families, the father and the mother. And it is command for that unit to be cohesive, to be prominent within God's kingdom, and really raising up the next generation. So as Christians reflecting on this commandment, what does it mean for us, and how do we react to it? How should we see it?
Well, once again, let's start by deconstructing what we've often done with it. And this is the commandment that, skeptics will look at this commandment and they'll put it with some verses later in Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 9, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 21, which are two passages where God tells them, okay, look, if a kid is constantly disrespectful and he never listens and he's constantly defying his parents, you take him to the elders. And if the elders decide this is just a bad situation, you take him out and stone him. All of a sudden, getting grounded when I was a teenager just doesn't seem quite so bad. Okay. And that's what we think when we hear this is don't talk back or you'll get stoned. Okay. There's a whole lot more going on here. And Michael, what you said about the elevation of the family, building up the family, that's a great place to start with this. One of the things that we say in social studies is the foundation of a society is the family. Okay. In fact, when one of the theories about where governments kind of grew up in human society is they started with the family, and then as the family got bigger, it became the clan and the tribe and the nation, and it grew out from there. And you see an example of that in the books of Genesis and now in Exodus, where you had a family and a clan and tribes and the nation. Okay, so the family and a cohesive family is so important. And what is the measure of a cohesive family? Well, the measure of a cohesive family is the leadership that is brought in by the parents. Okay. One of the things you see in the that's brought up again in the New Testament, whenever the New Testament talks about leadership, and the Old Testament reflects this too, when the Old Testament talks about kingship and leadership, in both cases, it talks more about the responsibilities than the privilege. It's kind of a heavy is the head that wears the crown kind of an idea. And in a similar way, there's a responsibility that comes here, and a responsibility that God is calling on us to honor. Okay. So there's showing proper respect for the position of the parents. And there's a second aspect to it that does get talked about, and that is caring for our parents as they grow older, showing respect not only for parents when we're growing up, when they're trying to teach us, when we're learning from them, when we're under their authority. That idea of authority is very important here, but also as they get older taking care of them as well. So that is wrapped up in this respect for authority and this respect for how God has ordered the family, how God has structured the family, and respect for the very concept of authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of good ideas wrapped up in there. I like the idea of authority and the idea that is so important for the family structure. Literally, the word structure doesn't have much meaning unless there is some authority. There's some structure to the family itself. As I'm reading this commandment, obviously, to command someone, God is commanding children to honor their father and their mother. But I think God is also doing something here that he does in other places throughout Scripture, that God is giving a commandment to someone else to follow someone, but really the commandment is for the authority figure. God is telling the father and the mother, be the type of parents that are worthy of being followed, that are worthy of being honored. The same thing goes for when Paul talks to in Romans chapter 13, honor the government, right? Paul knows that likely his letters are being read by the Roman officials who are watching over him. He's not saying he's not trying to subvert the government. He's saying honor the government because they're honorable. He's basically saying the government should be a government that is worthy of being honored. In the same way, wives, submit to your husbands. Men, male leadership within the church. These aren't commands to subordinates that you need to honor them. It's that the leadership needs to be worthy of being followed, worthy of being honored. And likewise, just as for men, it's not our choice whether or not to be male spiritual leaders within our families, within the church. We can't give that authority away. God has given the authority, and it's not up to us to say, I don't want to do it. In the same way, parents don't have an option about being worthy of honor, of being the ones who are going to provide structure, because if parents don't do it, the structure will not be there. The family will fall apart. And Jeremy, you were mentioning, yes, the child might get stoned, and I don't think that there might be one or two examples, but I don't think that there's much historical evidence that was ever used. Pretty good threat, though. Still works on me. At the same time, the shame that comes from a dishonored child, an Absalom, or we can think of so many Old Testament and New Testament and modern examples of children that went far astray from the stable pillar of the parents. Even if they are the stable pillar, it's still shameful, right? The honor that was due them, that the child did not give, is now being reflected in the community that's seeing a parents that had their stuff together, but they weren't able to mold their children properly. Anyway, so I see this. The idea of authority is not just for the child to follow, but something for the parents to live into.
Right. Yeah. It is a calling to the parents to be honorable. I had a student one time, and I felt horrible for the student. It was a previous school, because we were actually talking through children obey your parents in the pastorals, or Ephesians.
Ephesians, yeah.
Yeah. And he said, well, what if my dad, and the fact that he said my dad isn't worthy of this respect? And I felt so bad for him, because I knew why, I could tell why he was asking. Yeah. I'm like, well, it's not, this command isn't direct. You can't control what your dad does. You can control what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's that idea of respect for the position. Okay. Respect for the person that fills it. You don't have to think that they're always doing the best job with that authority, to respect the sense of authority. And that respect for a sense of authority. See, here's the thing. The way we respond to an authority figure shows us how we think of the concept of authority. If we rebel against authority for no reason, we just rebel against an authority figure because we can. Okay. And that's different from rebelling. You know, there's a whole host of reasons, but there's just rebelling because you can. That shows a disrespect for the very concept of authority. Well, who is the ultimate authority? Where does authority come from? Who created the family? Where does this authority flow from? Okay. To rebel against an authority is to rebel against the authority. Okay. So when we rebel against authority, we're saying I don't respect someone who is in a position of authority over me. Well, God is in a position of authority over all of us. Okay. So how do we respond to God's authority? And that's a key point here. And one of the things you see is as the family structure begins to break down, as people begin to lose respect, okay, respect for other places of authority also begins to break down, and you see culture begin to break down, and then you find out that you're not going to live long in the land. Okay, which we'll explore that concept, how all of this kind of fits together with that promise as we go forward. But when we don't instill a proper respect for authority, and part of instilling a proper respect for authority, let's be honest here, is using that authority well. Okay, we've all known authority figures that they use their authority, they abuse their authority to show they were in charge. Okay. For them, the authority was about having authority, not using the authority. Okay. And that never ends well. And one of the things that does is it breaks down respect for the concept of authority in and of itself. And part of the job of the parents in Israel was to teach their children. We see that in Deuteronomy 6, which interestingly, Deuteronomy 6, where it says, in Deuteronomy 6, it says, bind these laws, put them on your door, bind them as frontlets, all of that. That comes right after Moses goes back over the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Okay, so he says, here's the 10 Commandments. Now, as you go, you need to teach your children to respect these commandments. Okay, see, the transmission of the law was the responsibility of the parents, which means that to respect the parents was to respect what the parents taught. To respect what the parents taught would have included respect for the law. So, and that's purposeful. That's one of the things you see in Deuteronomy is it is purposeful. So to transmit the covenant requires purposeful parental pedagogy, to use a technical educational term. I just love the alliteration there. It requires being purposeful in this. Now, if it's done, will all children follow this? Well, no. Okay, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's what Proverbs says. And we all know, if you've studied Proverbs at all, they're generally true, which means sometimes they're not. It doesn't always work. But when we train children to go, and here's the interesting thing, this commandment doesn't stop when you move out. Okay, it doesn't stop when you turn 18 and become legally an adult. Okay. But if the parents do the job that they're supposed to, if they honor God by teaching the law, one of the ways the children will honor the parents is to respect their authority, but also it will be to follow the things that they have been taught even into adulthood. One of the things we learn in government class is some of the earliest shapers of our political opinions are our families. Okay. Kids learn things when they're young that stay with them for the rest of their lives. Okay. You ever when you're a new parent, you ever looked at your kid, open your mouth, and your parents start talking? Okay. It's like, wait, you say something and you turn around and go, wait, where's my dad? Now, in my case, I sound a whole lot like my dad. So it's like double whammy. Okay. Because not only is it what my dad said, it's the way he said it. It sounds like him. That's not a bad thing because it means your parents did something right and you're passing that on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're making me think of this idea of the external hard drive, right? That memory that we plug in and it doesn't belong on the main computer, but it's something that I need for another time. That's essentially what the parental child relationship. That's not all of it, obviously. I don't want to oversell this idea of memory, but so much of this teaching aspect is to pass on, right? And remembering it, perhaps one of the sub themes of the story of the Exodus, everything leading, I really hate to even put a cutoff on this, but it's that we forget, right? The Israelites are constantly forgetting. And so maybe what the Israelites needed was a good mom and a good dad, right? So many times throughout Judges, it says when the prophet died, right? When the last generation died. Basically what it's saying is when mom and dad died, we forgot everything. And so the job of the mother and the father is to maintain memory and to constantly remind children. And we're young parents. I'm sure there are those within our congregation who will say to us, "Oh, it never stops. You never get to stop reminding your child just how awful of a decision is that they're about to make, and then they make it, and you say you got to learn from that. Please learn from that." Yes. Anyway, I'm getting my own personal session here. Part of being a parent is reminding them about not only what they should do, how to live long, but also what God wants for them to do. A proud moment as a parent is when it starts to stick, right? When they make the connection. Oh, that's like what Jesus said, or oh, that's like this other story in the Bible. Like, oh yes, there's a reason why we are constantly going over the narrative of Scripture and saying these people are real, so that you can learn from them. Anyway, so the teaching part of being a parent, not all of us wanted to be teachers, but we all get to be teachers. So because of that, we as parents are allowed to be a part of the flourishing process for these children. Okay. I kind of want to get to another part later. Can we talk? Let's talk about the prosperity that comes from a child honoring from their parent. How does that manifest itself? What do we expect to happen? How does this promise come true?
Well, this promise comes true in that when we see our parents as honorable, when we see other people as honorable, hopefully what the parents will do in this situation is they'll teach the law. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they'll teach the concepts behind the law, and they'll teach what the law is. And we've talked before, if you boil the whole law, if you boil the whole law down, okay, if you boil it all down, it's love God and love your neighbor. Okay. And part of loving your neighbor is to see them as being created in the image of God. And so one of the things it's important to remember, no welfare in ancient Israel, no retirement fund, no 401k, none of that stuff that we take for granted today. Okay. So you had to work for as long as you could. Well, what happened when you literally were physically too old to work? Well, you were dependent upon your children. And so part of honoring your parents was, okay, they took care of me when I was small, which is a whole lot of work. Okay, I will now take care of them when they need me. Okay. And if you've ever read the book where they sing the song, oh man, see, I referenced it and now I can't remember it. Forever and always your child I'll be, or something. Anyway. As you go through the book, it starts with the mother singing the song to the baby and holding the baby in her lap. And by the end, the son is singing the song to the mother and holding his elderly mother in his lap. Please, if you're familiar with the book, I know I just turned on the waterworks, but go with me here. Okay. You can tell a lot about a society by the way it treats its weakest, the elderly, the very young. See, to take care of those who can no longer, quote unquote, contribute to society, that shows a fundamental respect for human dignity. Whereas to discard them because they're, quote unquote, useless, in other words, they're not useful to me, which, even after there's still a use that can come and still benefit that can be given. And, I'm sure we'll get a chance to bring that up too, but that places an instrumental value on human life where people are valued based on their utility to others. Your value as a human being comes from the value that other people, powerful people, place in it. I hope that makes you shudder. It makes me shudder. Okay. Because what you're doing is you're basically saying these people are disposable because I don't have a value in them. And that when that happens, society will completely break down. The whole thing will fall apart. Okay. When we view other people instrumentally as their value comes from what it gives me. And if they don't give me any value, I don't have to treat them like a human being. That is incredibly dangerous. And that's where societies begin to fall apart, because we're looking out for number one, we're throwing people overboard. The bonds of trust that society depend on begin to break down and they begin to fall apart. You can't trust any relationship, and society will fall apart, and you literally will not live long in the land. Okay. There's a sense in which, yeah, this is a promise, but this is a promise where God is telling them, look, if you do my commandments and you follow this command, the result will be you will live long in the land. Your culture and your society will be sustained because you will pass on these laws that I'm teaching you. You will view one another as having fundamental human dignity and fundamental human worth because you're all made in my image. And you will view each other that way because the previous generation passed on what they learned. For I pass on to you what was given to me as of first importance. Okay. It's been passed on.
Yeah. By the way, the book is Love You Forever by Robert Munsch, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
There, yeah. Quick Google got that one for me.
Yeah, it's always good to save my references.
So it's funny. You're actually going in a different direction than I would go with this, and I apologize, yet I really don't apologize for going down the rabbit trail that I'll go down for just a second. So you're going down the trail of it's the parents who are being taken care of, and you're right. Like you have to essentially you're raising up a generation to take care of you when you need it. So I actually taught this today, teaching income inequality and poverty in my economics class today. And I'm not going to get into too many things, but one basic fact, the number one predictor about whether or not a child will end up in poverty later on. You know, how do we know who's going to be in poverty later on? It's whether or not they come from a two-parent household, right? So when the commandment is honor your father and mother, God is telling his people, if you have a strong family, if you have a family that is dependable, that provides you with the toughness to get through hard times. And it also provides you, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it provides you with an external memory. So as you're wondering, how do I build up this business in today's context? How do I get through college? How do I get through high school even? Like how your parents have some level of knowledge, even if they never even went to college. They know people, like they're able to give you wisdom that helps you get through the really hard times in life. And when we start treating them, I like the way you put it, as means to an end, as having value only for what they do. We treat them like we would treat someone, and I apologize for talking econ too much. We treat them like someone we would treat in the market, right? And too often, and for the record, we should treat people in the market for the value that they offer. You get paid for the productivity that you add. That's great, but not for your family. No one in their right mind treats their family member as someone who needs to be productive. One last thought, and then we'll move on. I love the way that the preacher was basically giving advice to all of the married couples, and we've all had this happen. Wife comes to the husband, and she says, "Why do you love me?" And the husband just has 1,000 things go through his mind at once. I love you because you're beautiful. I love you because your cooking's wonderful. I love you because you're a great mother. And the list is really long. But the wise husband very quickly dismisses all of those and says, I love you because I love you, because I love you, because I love you. Right? There is no reason, because any of the reasons that we put forward will pass away. Right? Any value that we assign to our family members will pass away. The usefulness will wear away. Eventually, the most useful husband or wife, mother, father, eventually will be useless, right? We all go through these life cycles, and eventually we realize the only way to properly love someone is to love them because they are a creation of God, because He has given them worth, and God has formed our families. God is the one that has put us together. So it's not just marriage relationships, but it's parent-child relationships as well. And those are relationships that we aren't allowed to break. We can't exit them because that is what God has given to us. Anyway, I talked too much. We've got 4 minutes left. Jeremy, kind of a final comment. This doesn't have to be the final comment, but kind of leading us in on how we should think about this.
Well, I think, okay, I'll start with a pet peeve of mine.
Sure.
It's a new phrase. You've probably heard of it. If any of my students were to watch this, they would immediately burst out laughing because they know where they can probably figure out where I'm going with this. The ones that stay awake in class. So, 15%. The phrase, okay, boomer. I despise that phrase.
Give it some context real quick.
Okay. The phrase "okay, boomer," if you're not familiar with it, it's used on the internet, and it's a dismissive way for younger generations, which is, it's real fun when like an 18-year-old looks at like a 38-year-old and says, "Okay, boomer," because 38-year-old would be a millennial, and it's millennials who came up with the phrase, and I just find that hilarious when things like that happen. So it's a phrase used to basically say when someone of an older generation says, back when I was, or when I was younger, or the way we used to do things, and it's okay, boomer, it's very dismissive. And it is very, let's be honest, it's arrogant. I hate that phrase. And here's why I hate that phrase. In addition to it being dismissive and treating someone as less than you, okay, because of their age or something, or just treating someone as you're less important, your opinion has less value, so I don't even have to acknowledge it, I don't even have to engage it. In addition to all of that, I hate that phrase because it's so dismissive of the wisdom that comes from life. Okay. I mentioned earlier, Michael, you mentioned earlier, discarding people when their usefulness has ended. Okay. Here's the thing though. You can get a lot of use out of things. Okay. This is a really bad analogy. Please don't take it too far. Because I am not proposing repurposing people. But you ever seen someone repurpose furniture? Or
thought we were going to Soylent Green. Sorry.
No. See, I said don't push the analogy too far.
Out there.
That's you can still get use out of these things. Okay, and again, let's not press the analogy too far. Sometimes, though, the use is less obvious, and it's especially less obvious to those who don't have the life experience. You learn a lot by living. One of the things I tell my students, okay, well, I think I've told this story before, that I was in the library in grad school one time and overheard a couple of fellow students talking. They were about my age. I was mid-20s at the time. And they were talking about how, elders at the church I preach, they don't have a clue. There's only one elder that has any clue, and on and on and on. And I'm sitting here going, even at 25, I'm thinking, you are 25 years old. You don't even know the questions to ask yet. Some of the wisest Christians I know didn't go to grad school, didn't go to college, but they've lived. There's a wisdom in this idea of honoring father and mother. Do we honor the wisdom that comes from living? Because that's the wisdom we're going to pass down. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have no doubt in my mind that there are things that I say to my children that if my dad heard me say them, he would laugh. Not because it's things he said to me when I was a kid, even though he said a lot of the things, usually when they're misbehaving, that I say to my kids. Okay. But because when he hears me say them, he's hearing his father. Mm-hmm. See, there's a wisdom that comes from life. And what fools we would, okay, number one, I find it hilarious that we think generational conflict starts today. Okay, because all the things that older generations are whining about Generation X or generation millennials, and are they Zoomers, whatever the current generation are. Millennials they stopped about 2000. We're in a new generation now. But what all the things that they say about them, the World War II generation said about the baby boomers. Okay, and all the things that the World War II generation said about the baby boomers, the older generations in the 1920s said about the World War II generation. So I mean, generational conflict is not new, but it misses the wisdom that comes from life. How incredibly foolish is the fool who disregards wisdom because it comes from beneath a gray head? See, again, we don't stop honoring our fathers and mothers when we turn 18 and move out of the house. I was amazed how smart my dad got when I came home from college after a couple of years. Did my dad get smarter? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Because he lived 2 more years. But it wasn't my dad that got like orders of magnitude smarter. It was me. I was the one, because that attitude of I'm grown up, I know it all, had been broken down a little bit by being in college for a couple of years and realizing there was a whole lot of stuff I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I was smart enough to listen to my dad more, and my mom too. I was smart enough to listen to them more. Not as much as I should have. I'm sure that they've got stories from when I was 20 and 21, but still, it wasn't that my parents were 100 times smarter. It was I was smart enough to listen a little bit more. And I've gotten even more as time goes by. I realize how much wisdom there is, and how the honoring doesn't stop when we're done. Like you said a little while ago, Michael. There's sorry, I completely lost my train of thought there. Like you said a little while ago, it doesn't stop. It doesn't end when it continues throughout our life. Okay. That we listen and we learn.
Yeah. One quick aside, going through, you remind me, the original generational conflict had to have been the last person from the generation that had to die out for them to get out of the wilderness. And that there's that one guy everyone's looking at like, when are you going to die? Anyway, sorry, that's a morbid joke, but
that is really morbid. That is
generational conflict.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and wrap up here. What's the takeaway? What's the one thing to think about, to meditate on as we're thinking about how we I don't know, for some reason I feel like this one is at the same time extremely basic but so important. And so what's your takeaway here?
Well, I will say the basic things often are the most important, and the things that are the simplest to say are often the deepest to do. Okay, but let's put together what we've said. Okay, to respect authority is to respect God's authority. To respect a parent's wisdom and teaching would include respect for the law. To treat others with basic dignity would mean internalizing the heart of the law, all of which is going to create a healthy society, all of which is going to trigger the blessings of Deuteronomy and not the curses. And the blessings of Deuteronomy, at the end of book of Deuteronomy, God says, if you do what I've asked you to do, you will be blessed and will live long in the land. If you don't do what I've asked you to do, you will be cursed and you will be taken into exile. So almost at the core of that is this commandment and promise. And God is almost saying, if you follow this commandment, you will live long in the land. It's not a miraculous thing. It's God's understanding of human nature, because he created us, and saying, these are the ingredients to your success as a society. We talk about the success sequence sometimes in economics. graduate, marriage, kids. Graduate, job, marriage, kids. The success sequence. Okay. Um, different things are included on the list, but that's the basic sequence. In other words, don't have kids until you're married, things like that. Yeah. That's the success sequence. Okay. This is the success sequence for a culture and a society. This is how you transmit the things that will make you successful. And so, as a church, let's set aside larger society for a moment, and let's look at a church society. As a church, how are we going to be successful and live long in the land? Okay, and here, long in the land is being faithful so that we get to live in God's land eternally. Mm-hmm. We do these things. We honor our fathers and mothers. And fathers and mothers, be honorable. That's how we do this.
Yeah. I will just quickly echo what you said there. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to be a part of the continuation of God's kingdom. And we've gotten this far and haven't mentioned the fact that some people for different reasons are never able to become parents. But being a part of God's church means being a part of raising up the next generation, no matter how you're related to them. And so a blessing of being a part of Highland is being part of an intergenerational church that goes from the oldest member to the youngest, and knowing that we're all on the same journey, going to the same place. So I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that everyone has joined us for talking through these important commandments about how God wants to form his people. Next week, we're going to talk about some of those other commandments as we're moving on. I'm not even going to say what they are, but we will move on. And we're looking forward to moving on to number 6 with you next week. Thanks for being here. See you then.